That's great. Who's going to join us?
Nobody uses them. Oh my goodness.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our board meeting for Monday, November 13th. At this time, we kindly ask that you stand for the singing of our national anthem. Welcome once again to our board meeting. We have received regrets this evening from Trustee Kathy Archer. Otherwise, I believe we have everyone else in attendance. So thank you for attending this evening, to trustees, to executive council, those watching at home, our other staff and interested folk throughout the system. So thank you for being here this evening. We're looking at this point at item number 3, approval of the agenda. I'd turn your attention to the yellow page, which has a slightly different sequence of events. So if someone could see that revised agenda, and I'm looking for a mover and seconder. Moved by Trustee Beatty, seconded by Trustee Pattison. Questions or comments? All in favor? That is unanimous. Declarations of conflict of interest. Any items on today's public agenda to bring to the board's attention? Seeing none, confirmation of the minutes. This is from our October 30th board meeting. Questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll jump into our reports from trustee special committees. Item 6 is our program committee report from October 19th, and we'll kindly ask the chair of the committee to bring that report. Trustee Danko.
Thank you. And through the chair, at the program committee, we discussed an important action item, the secondary program strategy and plan for a specialist high skills majors program. And this is really looking at the strategy and the plan going forward for expanding SHISM programs across our system. We are looking to increase the number of SHISM programs that we offer. And of course, the ministry does have a goal of 25% of students being enrolled in these programs, but our real goal is to have quality programming available to all students. There is a application process that the staff have to work through for SHISMs, and we want to make sure that as we increase our programming, we do it in a purposeful way that doesn't impede other programs or doesn't have a detrimental effect on other programs. So I'll just go to the action item in the motion for the 2017-18 year, that we continue to offer, advertise, and support SHISM programs listed in the secondary program strategy, that we consider all SHISMs Tier 3 programs with specific boundaries based on the number of schools offering the program, that we begin an internal SHISM development process and invite all schools to submit applications over a 3-year term, that we develop an equitable system-level application process guided by the secondary program strategy for SHISM programs with the following guiding principles. New SHISM programs will reflect student voice, course selection data, and support of community partners through co-op data, incur limited costs with respect to school facility renovations, have no impact on SHISM programs offered in other schools, have no impact on the other programs within a school, and will have school-based leadership and a building leadership capacity plan. That we will also support multiple SHISM programs within each school, providing there is no negative impact on the SHISM programs in our secondary program strategy, and submit all recommended SHISM applications to the Ministry of Education for approval. So that is quite lengthy, and I think you may have questions. The committee certainly discussed how this can be rolled out in an equitable way to ensure that we are purposeful, that we're looking at student voice, that we're looking at what really the community is looking for in terms of programming. And one way to do that, as mentioned, is through course selection data. That's a very powerful tool. I think I'll just leave it there and ask for any questions, but with that, I'd like to move the report.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Trustee Danko. Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Trustee Johnstone. Open the floor to questions and comments. Sounds like you did a great presentation, Trustee Danko. Trustee Van Geffen will echo that.
Sure. So my question has to do last April, we sat as a board and we received a report from the Rural Schools Advisory Committee, and from that we had a direction as a board of trustees that staff explore, explore the feasibility of introducing an agricultural specialized high skills major, and the second part to that was expanding the current horticulture specialized high skills major to a second location within the district. Now, if memory serves me right, so that was Executive Superintendent Peter Joshua came shortly after with a report to the program committee, not speaking specifically to this motion, but if memory serves me right, that we were going to discuss this in the fall. So having not been at this committee meeting, just curious if this motion came up for discussion, and if not, when would we see further discussion to this direction from the board?
Mr. Director?
Through the chair, I wasn't at the program committee, but I'll preface it by this, and then I'll ask Superintendent Torrance to add any more to it. What we want is a systemic strategic approach to all SHISM applications, and we believe this is what this motion provides. So whether it's agriculture or horticulture, we're looking at what can we provide district-wide. That's still a central approach. So when we have communities in it showing interest, that we don't go back to a place where it's just school-based and we don't have a system approach. So I believe this captures all these requests and can be filtered through this process. However, I'll ask Superintendent Torrance to speak if this specific agriculture, horticulture that came out of the Rural Schools Advisory was discussed there, because I wasn't present.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, and through the chair. At the committee meeting, we did not discuss specifically the motion that was raised last spring. However, as outlined by Director Figueredo, we feel that the process that is outlined in the motion, in the recommendation, then will capture and allow for that motion to move forward. But it would happen within a process to ensure that if there is an expansion of horticulture programming or the opening of an agriculture programming, it would be in a sustainable long-term solution that fits in with our wider program strategy.
Thank you very much. Trustee Van Geffen?
Okay, so I'm just looking for more of a time, and I'm given the breadth of this motion that we see from this program committee, that's fine. Like I can leave it at that, but to that specific motion, just wanting to make sure that we're covering that motion. I'm all right with leaving that with staff for when they come back with regards to this, but the expectation would be there is a motion, there's a clear direction on that specific motion, not this one here, but the one back in April, and that we're covering that motion and fulfilling it no matter what the response is from staff.
Thank you for that, Trustee Van Geffen. And I think of that motion, we were specific in terms of where that information was coming back to, and it was specific to that topic. So I think depending on the next rural schools meeting date, we'd probably want to coordinate any action or further insight on that prior to the next meeting. So thanks for reminding us, and I'm sure we'll have some of those answers put into place, because I'm sure the committee will be asking those same questions. I see staff nodding, so we'll have that more information to come. Thank you, Trustee Van Geffen. Further questions or comments? See none, all in favor of the program committee report? That is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Item 7, Human Resources Committee report from October 19th. We'll go to the chair of the committee, Trustee Deeth.
Thank you. So at our committee meeting, we received an HR department update, and from our new superintendent of HR, Jamie Nunn, and talked about they've established the following 4 priorities for the year ahead, which is increased staffing levels in classrooms and schools, employee wellness and support, staff development and growth, communication and service excellence. And we also received a really great contact sheet that outlines all the different responsibilities and staff are what they're responsible for. So appreciated the update and the information that came forward for that. We also received an elementary enrollment update, and our enrollment is 322 FTE higher than projected. We also, for elementary teaching staffing update, we hired 7.6 FTE new elementary teachers for September as a result of retirements and resignations. And we also received a secondary teacher staffing update. And again, good news that we had hired 15 FTE new secondary teachers. And Superintendent Nunn also explained that this year that they have been very active on social media, which was a little bit different, and to make it a very open and transparent process, that candidates were encouraged to apply through the website, and they received 700 applications. In regards to, well, we were informed about the extension agreements update in regards to the extension of the collective agreements that were to expire in October 2017, but will now go through to October 31st, 2020. And finally, item G was OSSTF remedy agreement, and Senior Manager Giedis provided us with an overview of the Putting Students First Act and the remedy agreement, and that settlements have been reached between the Crown and OSSTF, COPE, and CUPE, but ETFO does not have a remedy agreement in place at this time, and I don't know if that's changed since that date or not. I'm looking for Superintendent. None. No changes. No changes. And with that, I'll bring forward the report.
Thank you, Trustee Deeth. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Johnstone. Thank you. Questions or comments? See none. All in favor? Unanimous. Item 8, Policy Committee Report from November 1st. Trustee Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to bring forward the report from Policy Committee from November 1st. Trustees will see before them in the report that we were first visited by a delegation from the Hamilton Wentworth Elementary Teachers Local. We had two presenters who spoke with some good detail in front of the committee with regards to our fundraising policy. They had some concerns that they wanted to make us aware of. They questioned controls in place, funds not being used properly, and some questions about equity as well. But they did want to make sure that it was well known that they were still favoring certain fundraisers that would have benefit for the broader community, such as the Terry Fox Run, Jump Rope for Heart, et cetera, et cetera. They had some recommendations that we heard, and we thank them. And as you'll see later on, there was a further discussion on the broader policy. We'll now go to the action item. It was quite simple. It was the transportation policy. It was renewed. The policy had some minor changes in wording, just to bring it up to a more current standard. There was some conversation about if further changes should be made, and at this time it was the decision of the policy committee that we would hold tight on the policy as it stands, knowing that transportation is a broader conversation that's taking place across the province, and if the province were to make changes in the future, it would be very likely that we would see this back sooner than later. The monitoring items that you'll see are a referral from board with regards to the fundraising policy. The fundraising policy will be coming back in the fall of next year, and we've asked staff for some specific data, including impact on outcomes, the role of the foundation, concerns about equity, controls, meaning what controls are put in place when it comes to fundraising, and a clear role and definition of the purpose of fundraising and how it is used by our different school communities. We'll also see item C, the fraud management policy, which was renamed to a prevention and management policy, fraud prevention and management. We'll see that now go out for consultation. It'll come back to the committee in January, and then again back to board for final approval shortly thereafter. And with that, I'm happy to move the report and take any questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Van Geffen. Thank you. Questions or comments on the action item or the monitoring reports? Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. I have a question with regards to transportation policy. And if we could just look at on page 8A-2, the very last sentence where it refers, and I guess my question is the the vehicle provided through HWSTS, does that include HSR vehicles?
Thank you very much. We'll go to the chair of the committee, Trustee Beatty.
So HWSTS uses a variety of vehicles, and HSR would be included as part of that complement.
And so with that, because it says 60 minutes on a vehicle, would that include bus transfers? So if a student has to transfer between buses, if I could just get clarification from staff on that, that would be great.
I believe the answer is yes. I think it's just a simple yes.
I'm not sure that that is known throughout the system, because I actually had a recent reply that it was for 60 minutes only on the bus, so not including transfers. So I just, and then my other question is, and I'm not sure if this is maybe relevant for the policy, but just with regards to communication on our website, and I know that it is our practice that whenever we have a bus that's late, that it gets communicated on the website. Should that maybe be mentioned in the policy as well, or are we comfortable with just having it as practice?
Yeah, so I think that is embedded in the protocol that the Student Transportation Services has. So that's a document, a PDF on their website, links from our website. I'm sure that would be covered, but I'll look to staff for confirmation on that. Mr. Director or Super Associate Director?
Yeah, that is correct. Through the chair, it wouldn't be something in policy, but on the operating procedures that HWSTS has, it's covered in there.
That's right. Perfect. And that expectation is anything that exceeds 10 minutes. That's the practice.
Okay. And just while I'm thinking about this, sorry to go back to my last question about whether that included the whole ride. Perhaps when you're traveling on HSR, including transfers, that you may want to clarify that in the policy, just because it's not necessarily clear from the language here.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
you. And I think that can be done. Thank you. Trustee Deeth.
I just have a question in regards to the delegation. It says here in that first paragraph, in regards to the delegation, they question the controls that are in place showing that the funds raised are not being used to benefit schools by being used for things such as technology or school uniforms. Are they saying that they're not being used for technology or school uniforms, or that technology and school uniforms don't benefit the school?
Trustee Beatty?
Just a clarification on that.
So if you could say that again, because I want to make sure that I fully understand the question.
So I'm just asking for clarification in regards to the delegation. So on the report here, it says they questioned the controls that are in place showing that the funds raised are not being used to benefit schools by being used for things such as technology or school uniforms.
Okay. So the delegation raised concerns about a growing disparity, or the possibility of a disparity between schools in different parts within our district, that some may have elevated opportunities through the use of fundraising for things that are listed here, and had questions about what controls were in place. And of course, this is the presentation that they made to us. It wasn't necessarily an interactive format, as delegations aren't that. So that was their question with regards to, number one, the controls that are in place, and number two, as I said, the disparity between different schools and different controls in different schools.
Thank you very much. Trustee Deeth?
No, I'm just wondering from the wording here, when they specifically mentioned technology and school uniforms, are they saying it should be used for technology school uniforms, or it shouldn't be?
It was an example that they cited of something that fundraising could be used for, and not every school would have that same opportunity.
Yeah, so they're not saying that those will not benefit schools. There are benefits to schools. So I think the wording of the sentence is a bit misleading. It probably could be tweaked a little bit to be clearer, but I think that's the intent of what Trustee Beatty mentioned verbally. But we could clean that sentence up just a little bit, because there are advantages. But once again, that's the controls, how it could vary school to school. but we can clean that up. I read it a couple times and kind of went, huh? So yeah, I know what you're saying. Trustee Danko?
Thanks, and through the chair, I was wondering if we could just change one word on 8A-1, courtesy transportation. Can we just mirror the wording that's also in A-3? Additional riders who would normally be ineligible, instead of are accommodated, but may be accommodated on the school bus without any increase in cost, et cetera. And that is the same language that's used on 8A-3.
Thank you, Trustee Danko. So I just want to clarify. So I see the wording on AA-3. What's the second reference?
AA-1 is
-1?
change are to may be. And
Oh,
then
I see. So the definition to align with this other section. Perfect. I think that is very logical and doable, so consider it done. Thank you. Further questions or comments? Trustee Hicks. Sorry, Trustee Hicks, I skipped over you.
That's fine. Through the chair, the referral from board about the fundraising. I have some real concerns here. What guidelines will be put in place to look at this? B, who will be on the committee to look at it? Will we have input from school councils, home and school, parents? It seems very simplistic here, but trust me, it's not. Are we referring to things like what the school would raise for hot dogs, pizza, and that type of thing? Are we also looking at fundraising things for raffles? Are we looking at the difference between the responsibility of home and schools versus school councils? If we're going to open up the can, we got to make sure we have very specific guidelines in place so that when it comes back to us, we have total input from all the stakeholders. And I don't see this in this motion. What I see is a very generic, well, yeah, let's look at it. Also, will the funds that each school is allowed through the budget process, through their superintendents, will that be looked at? Because Trustee Deeth has already mentioned the word uniforms. The funds that would come directly from the budget process through the superintendents for the schools pays like things like uniforms and that. But that doesn't cover extras within the uniforms, whether it's sweats and so forth. Just to show you how complex this is, will it include sponsorship that some schools get? Because some schools do get some very limited funds through sponsorships. So I guess through the chair, where are we going on this? What type of study are we having? Who's on the committee? And before I okay anything, I need very specific guidelines in front of me.
Thank you very much. Chair of the committee, Trustee Beatty.
Thank you, and thank you to Trustee Hicks for the question. The conversation that we had at the current policy committee on November 1st, we asked a lot of those similar questions, and I think what the gist of what the committee wanted was not to open the can, if I can use that phrase, that we needed more data. We needed a greater period of collection of that data over the course of a school year to be able to examine in fall of 2018 whether or not at that point we'd be able to have a broader discussion on it. So at this point, there is no review of the policy. The policy stays as is. But in 2018, it will come back to policy committee, whatever the composition looks like at that time. And with the additional data that we've requested on things like the impact on outcomes, equity, controls purpose, and all of those pieces of information was over the broader context of a year so that we have a full picture. And at that time, in 2018, we will use that data to determine if we wish to reopen it or if we wish to let it continue as is. So there is no change at this time.
Trustee Hicks.
And I appreciate that. The concern I have is what mechanism are you going to use to collect the data? you've got to get the data, then you take a look at it and see how far your study wants to go. Then you're going to have to find out to make sure that if you do continue down this path, that the committee membership is all encompassing in that. So let me give you an example. Will it be up to the superintendent of each school to collect the data that each school now has for fundraising? And when you go to that school, how are you defining fundraising? So it's the collection of the data that concerns me, not where we're going on it.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for that clarity. We'll begin with the director, Mr.
So I'll begin, then I'll ask Associate Director Zucker to speak to it. So when I look at the directions that staff bring back data related to individual schools in terms of how much is being raised, what the funds are being used for, and the averages for the district, we have a mechanism that already collects that through school-generated funds, but I'll ask Associate Director Zucker to explain what business services already does as a practice there in terms of having that data.
Thank you.
So thank you, and through the chair, school-generated funds uses a software called schoolcash.net, and it does track all of that, everything anyways. So we do have that information by school, and fundraising is actually tracked separately. And when we're talking about fundraising, we're talking about just the fundraising. So not sponsorships, not field trips, nothing like that. It's actually funds raised, and a lot of times in elementary schools, it's things like pizza days and that type of thing. So we are tracking that. In addition, each school is required to have and to share with their school council a fundraising plan at the beginning of each year that shows what they plan to do to raise the funds and then how those funds are going to be used. So that's something that we will also have available, and each school should be and is required to be presenting that to their school councils.
Thank you. Trustee Hicks?
So it's very specific in how you're defining fundraising for that particular school. So let me give you some examples. If a department within a high school raises funds for certain things within extracurricular activities, and you've already mentioned field placement or field trips and that, you're not looking at those funds, or you're not collecting data for those funds.
Stacy?
Sorry, thank you. And through the chair, if it was specifically fundraising done to fund, to go to a tournament or that type of thing, those funds are generated by the students. So it is school-generated funds, and it is fundraising. So that type of thing would be included. So it would say we raised $1,000 for our basketball team to go to this tournament, and how was it spent? It was spent to subsidize the cost of the tournament. So those are that's the type of information that we will have available, and we do have that information available through our software.
Thank you.
My last question, and I'll wait till this all comes back, but it's my understanding that certain high school teams charge a fee for tournaments from the players. Will that be included in this? Because if you're talking equity, some schools can do that because players have the ability to pay, and other schools don't because they don't have the ability to pay. So,
through the chair, if it is a fee that is charged, then that would be something other than fundraising. So you're correct. So some schools, if the fee was charged to parents, then that would not be included because that's not fundraising, whereas if a fundraising event occurred, then that would be counted as fundraising. So you will see differences there.
okay, I'll wait till it comes back, but you understand how complex this is.
Yes, thank you very much, Trustee Hicks. Any further speakers? See none, so to the Policy Committee report, all in Unanimous, thank you very much. So at this time, we had an added item. So item number 9, Special Education Advisory Committee report, October 25th. Attending this meeting, am I looking to Trustee Johnstone? Yes, thank you, Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. Through the chair, we had a fantastic meeting on October the 25th. I won't go through, I guess, everything, but I will say that the majority of our time was used on item B. understanding anxiety. We had an excellent presentation from, and I may pronounce his name incorrectly, but Randy Shiga. Did I? Yes, I'm getting head nods. So I think what was became very apparent through this presentation is that we provide a great many programs and supports throughout our system, specifically looking at students who do suffer from anxiety. Just to kind of give you an idea, we talked about working with students to help them understand what they called mind reading. So we think that we can read their mind. These kids are talking about me, I know it. Or being able to tell the future, if I do this, everybody will laugh at me. So working with students to overcome some of those mental barriers that certainly prevent them from reaching their full potential within our education system. And as you can see there's an entire list of resources and groups that we do provide for our students. What was interesting is that not only are these provided for our students, but we also provide programs for their parents and guardians as well. So when you're working with students, you're working with the whole family. I guess some interesting things to also note that on November 1st and 2nd, there was a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder conference. We did highlight My Path, My Way that was held at the beginning of November. We also have a joint SEAC meeting with our coterminous board at the end of the month. As well, ASD pilot project was announced, and that's Autism Spectrum Disorder pilot project. And as well as there was a ministry announcement with regards to plans of care with regards to anaphylaxis and asthma, diabetes, and epilepsy. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnston, for the summary. So motion to receive. Thank you. Seconded by Trustee Deeth. Motion to approve, moved by Trustee Johnstone, seconded by Trustee Deeth. Questions or comments? Trustee Deeth?
I'm just wondering, in regards to the understanding anxiety presentation, did you discuss numbers at all? And because I know these, I believe, and where they're offered and.
So I will turn this over to Janice, but I believe committee members were going to be receiving the full presentation, and I'm not. So we can certainly work to ensure that all trustees around the table receive the presentation. What was important to note is that we don't have a wait list for any of these programs. That was so in terms of the ones that are listed: Cool Little Kids, Families Wearing Less Together, Chilled, Mind Busters, and Missing Pieces. None of those currently have a wait list and haven't for a long time. So in terms of our service delivery, it's pretty immediate for these programs that were listed. But I will direct it over to, or through the chair, over to Janice.
Can't see Janice, but I'm sure she's over it. Oh, there you are.
Thank you. You're correct. What has happened over the years with these groups is that sometimes we have community agencies that offer groups, and sometimes we offer groups. And under the leadership of David Hoy, the community groups have looked at what they do best, and we've looked at what we do best. And so that's why we don't necessarily have a waiting list, but we also have full groups all the time. And we're really pleased that when we're able to offer the parent groups as well, that the parents learn what the children are learning as well, and they can support them.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Trustee Deeth, go ahead.
And I just want to ask in regards to that, I know particularly because Chilled is the one that I probably know a little bit more about, but I'm just wondering, is that still offered centrally at the board, or is it offered at other locations as well?
Thank you. Janice, do you have that information?
Through the chair, typically it's offered at the board.
Have we looked at offering it in other locations? I'm just thinking with some of our schools, even especially our rural schools, to be able to access some of these programs.
Superintendent?
Through the chair, we may have, I don't actually have the answer to that question, whether or not we have looked at that in the past or not.
But we can.
But we can certainly look to it and explore that.
Sure. Great. So we'll get that information. Thank you. Further questions or comments? Student Trustee Hai.
For the groups that are being talked about in the understanding anxiety stuff, what age group are they geared towards? Because they sound like they're for younger students, but I'm wondering what the supports are for secondary students.
Thanks for the question. Janice?
Through the chair, it depends on which group it is. They do cover the full range of children and youth and secondary school students.
I believe Chilled is for secondary students. Cool Little Kids is for younger. So.
For trustees. Trustee Danko?
Thank you. Through the chair, I was just wondering how students and families are identified for accessing these services.
Good question. Thank you. Superintendent Tomlinson?
Through the chair, typically the students would be identified through the teacher and the social worker at the school to see kids who are, could use a little extra help or might be having some needs in those areas. And then there would be permission forms to be signed by the parents where they would have access to that. So there's usually a discussion that goes on about the benefits of the group and who would benefit and why they think they would benefit. So it's certainly voluntary. And these are all short-term groups that kids really seem to enjoy, too. You see them coming in and having a good time.
Thank you. Any further questions? See none, the motion is to approve. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Item 10, just to let folks know that this is one of two private sessions on the board agenda. So resolution into committee of the whole private session as per Education Act 2072B. Do we have a motion? Trustee Van Geffen, seconder. Trustee Beatty, thank you. All in favor? That is unanimous. We'll go to the side room and be back momentarily.
artistically, but I'm just saying thank you. do that to them.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are now back in public session. There is nothing to rise and report at this time. We'll resume with item number 11, oral reports from liaison committees. Beginning with item A, City School Board Liaison Committee. I'm happy just to update folks that the next meeting will be in the new year. We're going to schedule some dates once we have the composition of our complement as of December 4th. So we'll likely see a meeting early in the new year. But other than that, at this time, there's no other information to share. Moving to item 11B, update from the Hamilton Wentworth Home and School Association. We'll look to Trustee Pattison.
Thank you, Chair White. Just to mention that on Monday, November 20th, from 7 to 9 at the Education Center, there'll be a parent cafe for the Ontario Federation of Home and School Association Leadership Work Group. And as well, they will have another meeting on Tuesday, November 21st at the office at 51 Stewart Street. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Trustee Pattison. Item C, HWDSB Foundation, Trustee Danko.
Thank you. I wasn't able to attend the foundation meeting last week as I was out of town, so I was going to go to Superintendent Stefanian to give an update.
Thank you very much. Sharon?
Thank you, Chair White. Just a couple of quick updates. We do have a series of dates that I will share with trustees related to foundation activities. We have our annual Young Artists of Hamilton Gala coming up on this Friday. It's November the 17th at 5:30. We have an ugly sweater pancake breakfast scheduled for December the 8th at 8:30 here at the Education Center. Prom Project, which is always extremely well received by students and families within our community, is scheduled for April the 14th at Delta and May the 5th at Hill Park. And we also have our golf tournament scheduled for Monday, June the 4th. I will also share with trustees that we spent quite a bit of time at the last meeting talking about governance, talking about program and planning, as well as succession planning for new members. We are doing some planning towards a spring opportunity to recognize and to celebrate our donors within the community. And during our most recent round of applications to the foundation awarded approximately $25,000 to 33 schools based upon individual school requests for opportunities for students.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Any questions or comments? Thank you for the update. Last but not least, item D, Ontario Public School Boards Association, Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. Our next OPSBA meeting is on December 7th. We also recently, this past weekend, had a regional meeting. Both myself and Trustee Deeth attended. The topic was mental health, and it was, I can see Trustee Deeth texting me. Sorry. Thought maybe she had a comment towards. So with that, there was, I think part of the conversation there was that mental health is not just about crisis response, but also the large part, 75% of it, is around prevention, that we all have mental health, that it's not a negative term, it's just mental health, and getting snaps from the student trustee. That it's looking at care and well-being. So that great discussion there. I do want to remind trustees, if you're not already registered, please register for the Public Education Symposium at the end of January. For those who haven't registered, just remember, hotel rooms fill up, so register now. Mitzi Hunter will be speaking at the main symposium, as well as there looks, to me anyway, like a fascinating keynote presentation on education in the age of globalization. So I encourage you to have a look. I was part of the team helping to design this year's symposium, so I hope that hope you find it interesting. And then finally, I do want to provide two items from a legislative update. So one, Ministry of Education announced $2.7 million to implement the revised curriculum on Indigenous histories, culture, and contributions, and that will the money will go towards grades 4 and 6 social studies, as well as 7, 8, and 10 history classes as well. The Indigenous Relations Minister recognized November 8th as an Aboriginal Veterans Day. If you've not gone and seen the movie Code Talkers, upload it. It's an amazing history in terms of the role of First Nations during World War II. And then finally, LCBO announced that 14 municipalities will be assigned marijuana retail stores. Hamilton is one of the municipalities that will be having a retail store. The purpose is to have accessibility to the community, outshine existing illegal markets, and to be away from school zones. The ministry is currently in talks with local municipalities. OPSBA is asking that local school boards in the communities that are receiving these retail stores that we also be engaged in those conversations. And that is my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Johnstone. Any questions or comments? Trustee Pattison?
Just a quick one. I didn't hear what that film you said to upload.
Code Talkers.
Oh, Code Talkers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So at this time, next on our agenda is recess, which is code for our standing committee. So we're going to take a recess from our board meeting, and we'll immediately begin our standing committee meeting. So I'll turn it over to the Vice Chair, Jeff Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I saw recess, I thought we were going to get some DPA. Here we go. It's my pleasure to call to order Standing Committee for November 13th. I see Dave Colley from HWSTS in the audience. Hello, Dave. I see Stacy Zucker at the helm. We're going to receive the Transportation Consortium report in just a second, but I'd first like to get an approval of the agenda. If somebody could motion for the approval of the agenda. Thank you. Maybe I'm speaking too fast. I have several now. Trustee Van Geffen, seconded by Trustee Johnstone. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Declarations of conflict of interest. Seeing none, we'll now move to number 4 on the report, which is from the Transportation Consortium. We'll start with our director, Manny Figueredo. And Manny, if you would please bring the report from the Transportation Consortium.
So thank you. Through the chair, we have a monitoring report in front of trustees. A year ago, the Transportation Consortium update was provided, and some feedback was provided in terms of the content of the report and then to look at data over time. So what you'll see is a new template in terms of how Stacy and Dave have worked through this report, and which was filtered through the governance committee. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Stacy, who's put a basic slide deck together to walk us through the report, and then we'll be open to any questions that trustees may have.
All right. Thank you, and through the chair. So as Vice Chair Beattie mentioned, our General Manager of HWSTS, David Colley, is here. David has been with us for, say, 2 years now, and he helped put together all of this information that was requested. So if we have specific questions, I may be turning to Dave to answer some of them. As Director Figueredo mentioned, the report does show some comparatives from the prior years. I'm going to highlight some of the current year data, and we'd be happy to answer any questions later, but I just thought that this would help us look at this data and interpret what it means. So The first section that we have talks about inquiries, and they're split up into many different categories. But when you look at the total number, this year, and during our startup, so in September, we had 4,624 inquiries for startup. That seems like a large number, but again, given the number of students that we do transport, and if you compare it to the prior years, it's actually lower than last year. So again, if you look at information about our driver shortages and about the actual number of delays that have been posted, you would expect this number to probably be higher. But we do feel that as a result of better communication and as a result of being able to post delays on the HWSTS website, which then updates our school websites, and if parents had signed up for an alert, then they actually receive an email informing them of the delay. So although delays are never a good thing, I do think that our communication about the delays has been better so that we are able to keep our number of inquiries down. In addition, French immersion inquiries have decreased. We have updated the wording in our policy, well, just recently in our policy, but prior to that in our procedure, which just does discuss community stops and does give our information about them in the fact that the walk distances to the stops don't necessarily apply with our community stops for French immersion. So I think just putting that information out there and being better at communicating it has reduced our number of inquiries. When we look at the next part, which would be that I wanted to highlight, is the reported run delays. So if you look at this current year, there are actually 1,467 reported run delays. So those are the delays that are actually reported on our website versus 807 in the prior year. So there are 4 main reasons that has increased. One of them is driver shortage, and there are, in fact, likely more delays this year than there have been in the past. 2, Dave Colley, our general manager, has been very good at insisting that bus companies post our lates. Again, we do hear from parents and from trustees and from schools that not all of the lates are posted. When Dave does hear that information, he does contact the bus company to remind them of the importance of posting those lates. And as a result of doing that, and as a result of monitoring that, we are able to make sure that they are recorded on the website. In addition, when you post something on the website and you say a bus is going to be 10 minutes late, and then all of a sudden it turns into 20 or 30 or 40, we've also been encouraging the bus companies to update those lates. So again, sometimes reminders are necessary, but Dave has been reminding them when it comes to his attention. He's been actually showing them the data to show that it hasn't been updated and insisting that it does get updated in the future. The last reason, and one that may, I guess, call into question the number of actual lates, is that bus companies are posting the same late multiple times. So Dave equated it to somebody waiting at the elevator, or when you're waiting at a crosswalk and you submit it and then you don't see anything happening, so you hit it again and then you hit it again. And so we've had instances where a bus company has reported the same late 20 times. And so, again, as soon as that has been happening, there's no little hourglass that happens to show you that it's updating. So I guess the bus companies are being, I guess, better safe than sorry. If they don't think that it's been posted, they'll post it again, hit the elevator button again. So we have been letting them know that once you've submitted it, it's going to update, so you don't need to constantly be updating it again. So those are the 4 main reasons that we see an increase from prior year. The next section that I wanted to highlight are courtesy riders. We had 101 in September, but our procedure does state that the extension of courtesy transportation is to be implemented in October at the earliest. So if you look at the number of eligible spots, you'll see that the number of eligible spots for 2017-18 is approximately the same as it was for 16-17. So we would expect to have the same number of courtesy riders once we get through all of the requirements in order to add those eligible, or to use up those eligible spots for our students. Some of the highlights from 2016-17, the safety initiatives, one of them is our on-site bus safety training. So that's offered to all of our elementary schools. So when you look at the numbers here, you can see that there are still other elementary schools that could potentially offer this training, and we are making sure that all schools are aware that they can have this training. In addition, first rider, so that's when your kindergarten student is going to be riding the bus for the first time, and therefore there's some programs that are offered in the summertime where you can take your student and get information about riding the bus. So that information usually goes out in the summer, and we think that we could increase the numbers by providing that information at the time of kindergarten registration. So those are just some of the potential changes that we could implement to hopefully increase the amount of safety training that's provided to our students. In addition, we had some technology initiatives. We are looking at the technology that we use for planning, and there was a lot of data cleanup that happened in our current technology in order to make sure that our walk distances are calculated properly, and that also the time on buses is calculated properly, and make sure that the turnarounds are all highlighted appropriately. We have been looking at operational enhancements. So Dave now, he's been around forever, 2 years, and so he's able to make some operational changes to look at what's happening at HWSTS. We did do a bell time study on the West Mountain, and it did result in, between the two boards, a reduction of 4 buses. So that's important work that's happening. And then we did extend our bus provider contracts for this year as well. When we look ahead for 2017, the current year that we're in right now, we will be doing another efficiency or bell time study in the Waterdown area. There was a posting out for an operations supervisor, and that comes with looking at the structure at HWSTS and looking at our efficiency and effectiveness review that was done by the ministry and starting to implement some of those changes. And we are actually doing interviews this week for that position. And then we are looking at reviewing the transportation software and making sure that we do have the software that's best for being able to provide efficiencies to transportation. So that's what I wanted to highlight from the report. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the remaining part of the report or anything that I provided tonight.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker. I'll look to trustees for questions and comments, starting with Trustee Deeth.
Just a couple of questions. In regards to reported run delay breakdowns, so it's almost doubled since 2015. Is this the aging of the buses, or is that something that's being addressed?
Thank you. And through the chair, I would say that if you look at the number of delays in September 2005 that were reported versus 2016, 2017, it really does have to do with us encouraging the actual delays to be posted on the website. So it would be hard to determine if that's what the actual cause is, if there are more breakdowns, or it's just more being reported, which we've been encouraging.
And the only other thing I want to say is if you are looking at, you were saying in the Flamborough area on those combined bus routes, just make sure that we really communicate that out ahead of time.
Absolutely.
And do we know, are we looking at this for next year?
So as we go through our planning process for the next year, it is something that Dave and his staff will be taking into consideration. And if it's possible to implement it for next year, then it would be. And if it will take some time to coordinate, then it could be the year after. But it would be nice to be able to make that change sooner rather than later.
And because that would mean bell time changes, so how would we start that whole process? Because I'm assuming that would have to happen first.
So that is something that we look at. The first thing that happens in any of these studies is we look at what's the maximum time change that we would, as a board, think that, or give Dave parameters to work within. So the maximum that we want to change a bell time is 15 minutes, that sort of thing. Those are the parameters that we look at. Then the company that does the work for us takes into account those parameters and makes suggestions accordingly. Then those suggestions would come back, and then a communication would happen with the school community.
And do we have parameter guidelines around changing bell times?
Through Executive Council, yes, we used the same parameters that we used last year. So it's not something that is approved. It's something that, from an operations perspective, we've looked and said, what could we tolerate to have the minimum impact on families? I think 15 minutes either way was what we had said.
Just through the chair to add to that, and all those updates and the time studies come back to Transportation Governance Committee to review. So last year when we gave the parameters, it saved four routes, and then we moved ahead. But those are the parameters that Dave's going to work with and come back with what's the potential impact before any decision's made. And the other thing around delays, I think it's just important to know that Dave has done an incredible job of requesting that people have to track and put their delays in. As a matter of fact, and another thing to consider, one of the providers has mentioned that not all delays are as a result of shortage of some bus drivers. The traffic over the last year or two and road work has also caused delays that we haven't seen in the past. So I just put that has come forward from some of our providers as well.
And just finishing off on that, if we were to change bell times to accommodate the buses, when would that communication go out to a school? How far ahead?
So we definitely want months ahead of time, but communication will be key like last year when we made the changes. But until it comes to governance, we'll have to decide when that time study is done, whether we actually have time to implement for the upcoming year. And it's important because Dave's team also needs to know, because they start mapping out routes months ahead of time. So they have to be in place before their work can even do this. So I think in the new year, we'll provide an update through the Transportation Governance Committee update to trustees of where we're at in that process.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Deeth. Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. Through the chair. So first is just a comment on the First Riders program promotions. I know that I received questions and also saw a lot of questions on social media about when that was taking place. So great idea to promote it during registration, but also if we can just make sure that it's up on the website during the month of August, that would be fantastic, and on all the school websites as well. And then with regards to reporting bus delays, so I know that there's a number of times where it doesn't get reported onto the website, and I appreciate the superintendent mentioning that during the presentation. My question is, what is the process for bus drivers to report that they're late? Have we identified why they're not reporting? And is there a way for us to be more proactive, such as GPS tracking? I know that I believe that it was suggested in the past that we would have GPS tracking. So I'm just wondering if I can know the process, why drivers aren't reporting, and GPS tracking, if that's a possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, Dave has done a very good job of holding the bus companies accountable for reporting those delays. So our assumption is that they're being reported. And if they're not, when they come to his attention, then he is actually calling them with the examples and, again, holding them accountable. So I think by doing that, although there are still some that aren't happening, and we know that and we've heard that, just the sheer number that in the increase in the reporting, I think does show that it's working and it's going to take some time. But I think that that expectation is there all the time that they are reporting. And it is important to hold them accountable so that if it's not reported, if it gets reported to Dave that it hasn't been reported, he's following up right away with those providers to say it needs to be updated. And sometimes if we catch it in time, if we're hearing from a school that a bus still hasn't come to pick up students to bring them home yet, we're able to make the change, make them accountable right away. And sometimes it's an after the fact, and then it's a, for next time, it's important to keep it updated. So it's just that accountability piece. And then as far as GPS goes, there is an additional cost, and we know some consortiums have used GPS, some had GPS and then have stopped using it. It is something that if we were to consider through the RFP process, we would have to include it as something that we wanted all buses to have, and then they would take that into account when they were providing their submission for the RFP.
Just in follow-up to that, it just seems so very labor-intensive having Dave make all of those phone calls, and when schools are reporting it, it's when it's become a serious problem, as opposed to some schools maybe it's not, parents aren't necessarily calling in because they've gotten used to the delay, or they've just kind of given up and have resorted to picking up and dropping off their kids. So I just, I guess I would like to hear more about why bus drivers are not reporting the delay, and if it has something to do with they don't have time while they're driving, because they can't necessarily, I don't know, text in or do they radio in, but just if we could kind of pinpoint that might be a worthy discussion.
We can take that away for sure.
Great. And then my last question was just around the reason for delays for student issues. They've gone down from last year, but they're still over double what they were in 2015. Do we know what's accounting for an increased rate of student issues on the bus?
Again, I would say that comparing to 2015 is tricky because we weren't holding them accountable in 2015. So I can't guarantee you that 2015 is a completely accurate number. It's the number that were actually reported on the website. It may not be the number of actual student issues that were that occurred.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. I have Trustee Bingham next.
Sorry. I'm concerned about the tracking, the incident reporting tracking, because it says at the moment the incident reports basically at the level of the school board. But if the driver is not our employee, and yet the incident reports are going to the school, I think we need to actually properly track this, because we're talking, they're handing in what I call a pink slip. If there's an incident on the bus and they hand in the pink slip, it goes directly to the school board. But then we've got a student who's obviously aggressive, or several students, and it continues going on, and it's not immediately addressed. Who's really accountable? Because I just feel the driver, not being our employee, needs to have somebody backing them on this, or it's their word against the student's word. I'm finding there definitely needs to be more in this, so that there is more responsibility on both sides. I really feel we and HWSTS and HWDSB and the bus companies need to tighten this up a lot more, because aggressive students, what we're finding now is that aggressive students are also being very aggressive toward the drivers, not just other students. And we need to tighten that right up somehow. Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Bingham. And it would be my understanding that the bus environment is considered an extension of the classroom, extension of the school. So I'd look to Director Figueiredo. Perhaps you can offer more on that.
So thank you for the comment from Trustee Bingham. So as a former principal, I'll remind all trustees the importance of that we need our bus drivers challenges. We need them to report an incident. Without reporting, a school principal can't follow up. However, we do require them to document it. Yeah, on a slip, that's a duplicate. So when they follow up, and then it's our job as a school, as the principal, to investigate around whatever that incident was, like any potential safe schools infraction. So the school bus is an extension of the school day. But we keep on emphasizing with our bus companies, if a bus driver doesn't report and document, or does it a week later, then it's very difficult for the principal to follow up. But once it's in the hands of the principal, we expect them to investigate and follow up and close the loop in terms of what the outcome is of that incident. When we say we don't track them, we don't have at the system level, but at the school level, principals have all their slips in terms of been tracking, and we remind people that that it is a privilege to be on the bus, and if there is something that's a challenge, then what are the alternative ways to support students to get to school? So the tracking happens at a school level, and if we went to any school, we could ask the principal to look at the forms. We have spoken to bus drivers at times saying some drivers are more diligent when it comes to documenting, and I know they feel at times that if they have to document in the moment, it takes time, but we say it's important if we don't document in the moment that we can't do the follow-up.
Trustee Bingham?
But I still feel I think we should look at something a little bit more than that. I just feel that there needs to be even more in terms of what if a bus driver has done that, but it isn't getting to the principal, or it's not, something is missing in there. It's a responsibility on both sides, and I think we need to tighten that a bit more. Because we do have a lot more aggression on the buses with some of the students, and it is toward the bus drivers. And we need to be able to address all the issues as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bingham. Looking to other trustees who may have questions or comments. Trustee Danko.
Thank you. And through the chair, I did want to start by saying a big thank you to, I guess, our communications department and everyone involved for the proactive communication, because despite having increased delays for some of my routes, I've had far less calls by parents. And I think part of that is informing parents about the websites, informing them to sign up for updates and that proactive piece. But the ultimate concern for parents that are still coming forward is the loss of instructional time for students at school. And so I just wanted to highlight that, because some students are missing a half an hour a day. So building on that, my one question is, are we rotating the routes that are doubled up, or are we rotating the routes that have a driver shortage so that it's not the same group of students that are experiencing those delays every single day?
Associate Director.
Thank you, and through the chair, permanent drivers will be assigned a permanent route. So if they have that route assigned to them, it is unlikely that that route would be affected unless they are calling in sick and then a spare driver, or that route needs to be doubled up. So as far as are we trying to move it around? Not usually. But again, we can't predict on a day-to-day basis if there are going to be any spare drivers required to cover off sickness or that sort of thing, or any time off. So we aren't spreading the lateness around. There are sometimes routes that are based on where they are easier to double up with the minimum. We're trying to minimize the impact on all students. At the same time, that sometimes does affect the same students a lot.
Thanks, and I appreciate it's not simple to just switch a route up or switch a driver up. The second question I had, and this may not be the appropriate place, but it was mentioned that the contract was extended. However, we're having issues with having enough drivers to meet the contract. So I was just curious why that contract would have been extended, and this may not be the right forum. And I'm getting a shake of the head, no, it's not.
I think that may be an in-camera conversation.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll take that one back. The third question was about the on-site bus safety training. So is that optional for schools to run, or is it mandatory and it just takes longer for some schools to get to it than others? And if it's not mandatory, could it be mandatory?
Associate Director.
Thank you. And through the chair, it is optional for the schools to run. Some schools will choose to do it every other year, some schools do it every other year, and some schools don't necessarily choose to run it.
Trustee Danko?
So related to that, do we see a decrease in incidents on the bus when schools do run that training? Or do we have any data on that?
That is a good question, and I don't have that information in front of me, and it isn't, I'm getting a shake of the head, so it's not something that we've been tracking, but it is an interesting question, so it is possible something that we could look at.
And given that we don't electronically track incidents, we would probably have to go back to the principals at the schools for their slips. So if we had a better tracking system or went back to the principals, I think it might be interesting to find out if it influences the number of incidents and, you know, consider making it mandatory, because I do think sometimes education, well, most of the times education is the best tool we have to make situations better. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Danko. Any further questions, comments from trustees? Trustee Van Geffen.
Thank you. Through the chair, could the associate director elaborate on the efficiency study in the Waterdown area?
Thank you, and through the chair, we've been looking at efficiency studies for the entire board, and really what an efficiency study does is look at both boards, look at the bell times, and look at the schools that are being, and the students that are being transported in any ways that by changing a bell time, we could reduce the number of runs that are provided, and therefore reduce the number of routes that we require and reduce the costs associated with it. So really we're trying to look at being as efficient as possible within that area. So we would look at a specific geographic area. You could look at multiple, it's a extensive process, I would say, Dave. So to try to look at the entire board at once would be difficult. So we've decided to do it by geographic area. We've also tried to look at places where accommodation reviews have already taken place and that the resulting changes would have already been made, because it wouldn't make any sense for us to do an efficiency study and change a bell time and then all of a sudden you're closing a school and it changes your transportation again. So we've tried to look at those areas as well. And like I say, we did West Mountain last year, and although it's still to go through an accommodation review, the changes would be further down the road. And we have to look at it as well with our coterminous board, because there aren't shared runs right now, but there are shared routes. And with the discussions that we've been having, we will be looking at shared runs as well, especially when we're looking in more rural areas. So there is the potential through this efficiency study to look at possible shared runs.
Trustee Van Geffen.
Okay, so I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, because I think this is now 3 years running, and given last year, like we moved a motion here that we talked about a bell time study that was taking place last year, and a tag on to that motion said a parameter to be included about shared runs within the consortium. Like that direction is already there, and we're a year later, and we're still talking shared routes. We're not talking share runs, and especially in this environment that we're in now, why is this not on? Like, I don't understand why this is not a priority. And I get the piece from staff that staff have a desire to get behind it. My question is not, it's not staff. My question is to the governance committee that oversees this. To me, it's not the will of staff, it's the will of that governance committee to make this a priority.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to the board chair who sits on the governance committee for a response.
So I appreciate the question. I'm not sure how clearly it's been stated, but shared runs, not routes, but shared runs are on the top of the list in terms of priorities. So right now, we know that we have difficulty delivering transportation services to all of the necessary routes. We have about, I think, 517, when fully implemented, buses on the road. So if we can eliminate a number of buses or overall routes, then that is that would result in fewer bus drivers required. So we would be looking at, I would say we are looking at, just as recently as our last governance meeting, to consider all options. And one of the top options is shared runs. Realistically, what does that mean? Usually it would be in a rural area where buses travel longer distances. In urban areas, there's less of an opportunity to share runs. But in rural areas, I think we spoke about this last year, that we might trial a couple examples, and that work was done around a bell time study, which I think only involved, Stacy, 7, 12, how many schools?
Sure, but it was the West Mountain.
Yeah, so it was a select number of schools and not necessarily beneficial to shared runs. But what I would assure trustees is that given the reality and pressures of transportation that we're facing, you're going to see shared runs hopefully in the near future, and with the intent of reducing the number of buses on the road. So I know that sounds a bit of a lofty statement because we've yet to see the exact organization of that, but the governance committee has taken any option available to us very seriously. And just this past meeting, we've asked staff to explore, when I say staff, consortium staff, to explore any and all possibilities. And we know from efficiency studies that to reduce our number of buses on the road, changing bell times and possibly sharing runs might be the best way to do just that. So I appreciate the reminder from Trustee Van Geffen. And as we report back through the school year, hopefully we can provide more information on that with the eventual outcome, hopefully in place next September.
Thank you, Chair White. Trustee Van Geffen?
So I guess my question would be, is direction needed? Because we gave direction unanimously last year at this time to explore that. So through the chair, is direction needed to continue that? Because it just sounds like, and the assurances that the chair give, that's fantastic, but actions speak louder than words. And I'm not seeing anything here that's telling me that this is a priority and that something is actually happening.
So I'll turn it back to the board chair.
So I'll keep my words to a minimum and suggest to trustees that we'll be back in front of you with results and action that you can then see for yourself firsthand.
Thank you, Chair White. Trustee Van Geffen.
So next question would be timelines.
In regards to...
When will we see something back?
Okay, I'll turn it back to the board chair.
So, and Dave and Stacy can remind us the exact dates, but I think in around March, Dave, consortium staff begins looking at routes. From there, routes are drafted and they go through a number of steps. So I'm not sure if Dave or Stacy wanted to chime in terms of the exact timelines, but I think roughly those conversations would begin in or around, in terms of results, in or around that time.
Thank you, Chair White. Associate Zucker.
Thank you. And through the chair, we are currently in the process of beginning the efficiency study. So, Dave, you can maybe add how long an efficiency study takes and when we would expect to get the results back.
We're expecting the results in early January. So right now the consultants have all the questions back and forth. And it's in January presented to the team and the governance what the results are. In that area, sharing of bus routes will be savings. Savings, not the sharing. Both options are.
Thank you, Dave. Trustee Van Geffen.
So just to be clear then, because I think the clarity helps, is this with the intent that in September 2018 that it would be implemented, not in the current school year?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. So just to summarize, that we will be getting updated as a board sometime in the new year, likely March.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Van Giffen. I have Trustee Mulholland next.
I have a question. The definition of a shared route and the definition of a shared bus. Could you explain that to me, please?
I'll turn it to Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. So route is shared, or a route is one driver, one bus, and could service multiple schools. And each of those schools that they service is a run. So one driver, one route could have multiple runs or multiple schools that they're servicing. So when we say a shared route, it could service Ancaster High, and then it could service St. Anne, and then it could service Ancaster Senior. And that would be a shared route because it's one bus driver, one bus, but two different boards and three different runs. And a shared run would be one loop, I guess I would say.
The share bus.
That share a bus, and so students from both boards would be on that bus at the same time, and then there would be two stops at each individual school to drop those students off.
And through the chair, we share routes now. Do we share buses?
Not at this time, no.
Would that help alleviate the problem we're having if we shared a bus? One bus, one route.
So that is what we're looking at right now through the efficiency study.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Trustee Mulholland. I have a question of clarification from Trustee Danko.
Thank you. Just on this topic about shared runs, I believe we were told that the governance committee is made up of people from our board as well as the coterminous board, and it requires the willingness of the coterminous board to share buses if we were to proceed with that. And in the past, that willingness wasn't there. And so we had given direction to pursue this further, but we can't proceed without that willingness. Is that correct?
So for that, I see two hands up, but I'll go to the board chair first.
And I think that's a bit of a misconception, but that's the way it has been explained. So I think the trustee has it correct in terms of the information that was shared. But through my dealings with the Catholic Board and Chairperson Pat Daly, I've observed complete willingness to share runs and routes, the whole thing. And I think the misconception started a number of years ago. I know, around 2011, 2012, under, I think, two consortium directors ago, we had, I think, at one point up to about 8% of our routes had shared runs of some sort. We were making progress, but I think there was a misconception in terms of those efficiencies. There were some logistical issues, and it pulled back with, I think, a lot more speculation about why and fewer discussions about why. But in my conversations with Chair Daly, it's been very constructive. The willingness is without a doubt there. So if he's asked, he would reiterate very clearly that they're committed to trying shared runs and beyond trying, actively planning possible shared runs where possible. The biggest difficulty is around bell times. So an example of that, and I think we can share it in this format, is in Trustee Deeth's area around Balaclava School. There's a Catholic school on or near the same property, and unfortunately the two bell times are almost 60 minutes apart. So 40 minutes apart. So if you were to share a route there, which is logical on the surface, you would have one school arriving more than 40 minutes or let's say an hour before school begins. So that causes a number of other difficulties. So that's where I think we need to be bold in some circumstances, not necessarily Balaclava. Could be an example though, where we look very hard at bell times and try to mutually find those benefits with the Catholic Board. And we may have to make some concessions around our thresholds on changes of bell times. Obviously, there'd be whole layers of communication that would be involved in making sure that families are very well aware ahead of time. But those are the realities right now. So when we say that the governance committee and the consortium are looking at any and all possibilities, it includes exactly that.
Okay, thank you, Chair White. Any further questions, comments from trustees? Seeing none, I do want to thank the Associate Director and General Manager Dave Cawley for the hard work put into the report that you see before you. Having seen these reports for the past 3 years. I think that this is the most detail so far that we see before us, and we thank you for your efforts on that. At this time, I'd like to get a motion to receive the report. So moved by Trustee Van Geffen, seconded by Trustee Danko. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That's unanimous. And now I'd ask for a motion for adjournment from Standing Committee. Trustee Pattison, seconded by Trustee Danko. All in favor? We are adjourned, and we'll turn it back over to the board chair to resume with the meeting.
Thank you very much. We are back in our board meeting, item number 12, resolution to committee of the whole private session as per Education Act 2072B. Looking for a motion to move in camera. Moved by Trustee Van Geffen, seconder Trustee West Hicks. All in favor? That is unanimous. Just to let folks that are watching know that there will be nothing to report, rise and report from that meeting. So we will come back into public session simply to adjourn the meeting for the evening. So thank you very much for your participation, and we'll see you again soon.
stretching.
Yeah. This place is freezing.
It's freezing.
Turn the heat up. Pay the bills.
Where's Andy? Yeah, exactly.
Pay the bills.
Where's Anderson? I think he's got the air conditioning.
Now, when I was saying it, I shouldn't use the word open words because Richard's going to sometimes when we try to correct the overall picture, we'll survive. Yeah.
appreciate the conversation. it'll be better than.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're back in public session. Last item, adjournment. There's nothing to rise and report from the private session. Motion to adjourn. Trustee Mulholland, seconded by Trustee Beatty. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much.
No. And it's a.
As far as withdrawal.
So what I had sent to Margaret is in what you have is a discussion paper, and the discussion paper has a copy of our credit lines. So I said to her, we do. Think of the conversation. The first one. Just to tell right now. I just assume when we end, it ends. Okay, thank you. I don't really know them, but I know the name. Mhm. Mhm. That should be a profiling excellence. It should be, totally. Because that's amazing. It's one person.